Wisconsin's Green, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but right now I would like to turn it over to our executive director to talk a little bit about what Green Fire is.
Great. Well, thank you, Tom, and good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see you all. I think we had 127 people registered for this meeting, and we know that all 127 won't show up, but we've got a really good turnout tonight, and we're grateful for that. So I'm Fred Clark. I'm the executive director for Wisconsin's Green Fire. We want to welcome you to our annual meeting, which we always hold around this time of year, and especially recognize those of you who might be new to Green Fire. On the call today, we have most, if not all, of our board members. We have most of actually all of our staff members except one. We have a number of our really active members and members of our Green Fire Science Council, but there's also many folks here for whom it may be your first time or your first real experience with Green Fire. And if so, we're grateful for that, and we hope you'll find reasons to stay engaged. You can learn more about Green Fire at any time at our website at greenfire.org, and likewise, you can contact us at wigreenfire@gmail.com. We'll go to the next slide, please. So it's hard to imagine for all of us, I think, that we're staring down the end of the year with the holidays coming ahead, but I think a really successful and impactful 2022. And for all of you who have been part of that success by contributing work, by contributing your time, your effort, your talent, by contributing financially, or helping us out in growing our membership, we want to thank you for all of that contribution. None of the things we've achieved this year would be possible without the collective efforts of people who are on this call tonight. Just to highlight a few of the things that we've sort of worked on this year. Post-COVID, thankfully, we had the first chance to roll out a complete set of our inaugural year of Green Fire Field Forums. And these are really our best opportunity to bring our expertise and our most knowledgeable members on different subject areas together in the field with members of the public, our own members, media, elected officials, and really dive deep on some of the conservation issues that we work on. If you didn't have a chance to participate in one this year, you'll have an opportunity next year. Our conservation socials, we held 6 socials all over the state from top to bottom, and collectively had over 300 people turn out for those events. But many of you know us because of the policy work that we do. And Green Fire is really our main focus is conservation and environmental protection policy and practice. And we bring the skill sets of our hundreds of members to those issues. What we're showing here on the screen is some of the work products that we've put out in recent months in the last year. And Paul Heinen and I, our legislative liaison, will be talking further in the program about the most recent Opportunities Now report that we released last month, titled Imbalance of Power. So more to come on that, but again, I'll just thank all of you who've been part of our success this year, and we've got more to share about what we're looking to in 2023. And Tom, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, Jenny, you can go right to the next slide. So a little bit of introduction to me as your new president. A degree in soil science from the University of Wisconsin Stevens Point, and I grew up in the UP and also in the Fox Valley. When I was fairly young, we moved to the Fox Valley, and in 1970, I participated in Earth Day, the first Earth Day. I marched on the banks of the Fox River for clean water, thanks to Gaylord Nelson, who Tia is one of our ambassadors. We're pleased to have that. And I'm pleased to say that after 50 some years and the Clean Water Act, we have a much cleaner Fox River, Wisconsin River, and indeed all of our water bodies in Wisconsin. We do have a ways to go, but I was very proud to participate in that. I'm going to drop into the chat more about me. There was a conservation profile in a recent newsletter, so you can read about it there. So now we're going to talk about our outgoing president, Terry Dalton. And I've already alerted her that this is going to be a roast. So I've been shadowing Terry for the last year. I've been president-elect for the last year, and I shadowed her and we worked closely together. It was really a pleasurable experience. Part of that is we conducted Fred Clark's performance review last summer. And as part of that performance review, I insisted that we, after the performance review, I should say, I insisted that we participated in something I do all the time called forest bathing. So it's a thing that, recently has been in the news and out in the media, the Japanese practice of forest bathing. But I've been doing it for as long as I can remember. I try each week to get out into nature and just experience and be in the present moment. So like I said, that first slide showed me sitting up in the Sylvania Wilderness area. My spouse snuck up with me and took that picture of me resting on the tree, just breathing in the forest air and enjoying it. So I thought after Fred's very stressful performance review, as usual, we had some things where he could improve and some things that he was doing well. We'd go do some forest bathing. So we took a hike in an old growth forest that happens to be only a couple blocks from my home. And the whole walk, Terry is chatting, talking. And finally, about halfway through the walk, I stopped and I said, Terry, we're supposed to be experiencing the outdoors, smelling the forest breathe and experiencing the trees and et cetera. And so I said, you can't talk anymore. And we continued a little bit further. And then we happened upon this. Next slide, Jenny. There was a huge eruption of pink lady slipper orchids in a bog in this forest we went to. And there were literally hundreds of them. They were very inspiring. And, we just sat there in amazement looking at those for a few minutes. And then we finished our walk in silence. And I got the impression that it was very difficult for Terry not to be talking, but we were able to finish the walk through the forest, which was relatively short. So that gives you an idea of what kind of person Terry is. So the next slide. So many of you know Terry is an artist. And part of every meeting we've ever had, Terry has injected either a reading, a poem, artwork, something more spiritual than science is naturally. And so I've always appreciated that. And this is an original artwork that Terry did of a site on Lake Owen where we had a fundraiser. And it was a very beautiful evening. And Terry presented this as a gift to the people that sponsored that fundraiser. And it's an example of her great artwork that she has contributed to Greenfire over a period of time. So true to Terry's mentorship, I have a reading from a book called Braiding Sweetgrass. Many of you will be familiar with it, by Robin Wall Kimmer, who's a Potawatomi Native American. And she talks in here about her journey from traditional science to more indigenous ways of being, and also the beauty of nature and science, and the fact that her professors, when she went to university to become a botanist, didn't appreciate the beauty of, say, the prairies and the goldenrod and the New England asters that bloom in the prairies. She was fascinated by the beauty, and her professor kind of lectured her a bit here. And here's her sort of reaction to it. I circled right back to where I began, to the question of beauty, back to the question that science does not ask because they aren't important, but not because they aren't important, but because science has a way of knowing that is too narrow for the task. Had my advisor been a better scholar, he would have celebrated my questions, not dismissed them. He offered me only the cliche that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And since science separates the observer and the observed by definition, beauty could not be a valid scientific question. I should have been told my questions were bigger than science could touch. So thank you, Terry, for always advocating for incorporating art with science. In fact, Terry teaches a class that I don't know if she teaches it, maybe she leads a workshop in art and science at UW Trout Lake every summer. And everybody in Greenfire knows that she does prep work that week. And so we have to kind of let her have a week off to indulge her passion for art. The other thing, like I said, she's donated many paintings. And, whether we're talking the beauty of lady slippers or the beauty of the water molecule, for example, it's the universal solvent. And if it wasn't the most dense at 4 degrees centigrade, our lakes would freeze from the bottom up instead of the top down, and it would make aquatic life very difficult. So there's much beauty in nature, was my point here. And so next slide, Jenny.
Yeah, I go in.
We have a gift for Terry. The board members and many of the work group chairs and the people that have worked closely with Terry have pooled our resources and purchased her a gift certificate to an art supply place where she can probably purchase enough art supplies for several years. I'm not going to tell you how much that was, but it's a pretty nice gift certificate. All of the people who donated were pleased to contribute. And the only thing I would say for those of you who weren't able to participate in that, a great stocking stuffer for Terry would be a supplemental donation to Wisconsin's Greenfire, which you can do online. So there's a place to comment there. And if you want to honor Terry's commitment to the organization and her service for the last 5 years, you certainly can do that. So I would invite Terry to unmute herself and say a few words.
Well, I have to say, that is my favorite art supply website. I don't know how you guys got that far into my online purchasing background, but somebody did some good sleuthing there. So that's very lovely. Thank you all so much. And I fully concur that if anyone feels moved, a donation to Greenfire is a great thing to add to. So thank you all. And as Tom said, I do tend to speak a lot, especially in meetings. And so today I was thinking, oh, I don't have to do anything at the meeting. It's so easy. But I did find a couple quotes that I thought I would just share as my last splash on the forefront of meeting participation. Not that I'm disappearing. So at first I'd like to say, the last 5 years have been really wonderful. I had no idea this organization was going to go as far as it has. And I wanted to read this first quote that I found that really made it for me about the growth of our organization. And it's by Thomas Aquinas. And he said, if the highest aim of a captain were to preserve the ship, he would keep it in port forever. Well, we certainly have not stayed in port. And I think 5 years ago, if we'd all thought whether this was a good idea or where would we be, we wouldn't have thought we would be so far along. And that is, as Fred has said, a credit to all the work of everybody here. And it's been so much fun. And also a lot of work, but fun work doing that with you guys. The second quote I found here is from Paul Hawken, who is, of course, we all know, brilliant. And I thought this was kind of good about the work of being president of the board of Green Fire. And he said, good management is the art of making problems so interesting and their solutions so constructive that everyone wants to get in on the work and deal with it. And I thought that is the real heart of what's going on at Green Fire. We have these amazing, phenomenal, and sometimes scary problems, but the solutions are constructive, and that no matter whether people think they don't want to get engaged, the next thing they know, they're part of a volunteer group. But really, I think the thing for me that the board is, being the president of the board has been, and I think Tom will be really terrific at, it comes with the third quote, which is from Gustav Mahler. And it's kind of about transitions, because we do have a little bit of a transition from my style to Tom's. So hopefully we'll be doing more forest bathing and listening and still keep that positive energy. I'm sure we will. But here's what Gustav Mahler said. The real art of conducting, and you know, he's a famous musician, the real art of conducting consists in transitions. And to me, that's what Green Fire is like, is a great orchestra, everyone working together, coming in with their parts. And with the board president and Fred, our executive director, and the staff all working together, directing the choir. So with that, I don't have a gavel, but I did find a very large and heavy axe that I could hold up to pass the gavel to Tom. If Tom wants to hold his hand up, there he goes. And of course, we haven't had to use a heavy implement like this with the board, but now he's got it, and it's all yours, Tom. So thank you to the board and the staff, and I will still be working just as hard, just with a new hat on.
Correct. You'll be our immediate past president, still member of the board, and helping through the transition period. Next slide. All right, so we have two retiring board members, and Terry has agreed to paint them a nice painting. So thank you, Terry. And we also have a nice gift for them in the form of a Yeti water bottle. So Kate Riley, who was she was a workhorse on the board, as was Ron Eckstein. Both did a tremendous amount of work. And if I started talking about what they did, we'd be on this forever. But I just want to thank them so much for their work. Ron was our secretary, and Kate led the charge through our strategic planning. So really excellent work on their parts, and we thank them for their service. And next slide. We have Susan Hedman, who's coming on the board. She was appointed by President Barack Obama to lead the US EPA Great Lakes Regional Office, and was a delegate that helped negotiate the 2012 Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. She's really got a lot of background that's going to be helpful on the board. Susan has a PhD from the Nelson Institute in Environmental Studies, a master's from the La Follette School of Public Affairs, and a JD from the Law School at the University of Wisconsin. So an impressive background. She's going to be a great addition to the board. Thank you, Susan. I think you're out there. And thank you to Terry for helping to recruit the new people. Just one of the many things she's done. Next, we have the business meeting for Wisconsin Green Fire. We only have two things to do. I think Jenny sent these out to people. One is the approval of the annual meeting minutes from 2021. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
I'll make that motion, Ron Eckstein.
All right, thank you, Ron.
I'll second it, Brian Pierce.
All right. Any further discussion? They're pretty short and sweet.
And
All right.
Tom, if I could just make a point of clarification, this is the business portion of our annual member meeting. If you are a supporter of Wisconsin's Green Fire, having either renewed your membership or made a financial gift within the last year, then we consider you a member and you're eligible to vote.
Thank you for that clarification. All in
Yeah.
favor of the motion to approve the minutes?
Aye.
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 Next, we have a treasurer's report, and I'll call on our treasurer, Bob Gerda, to say a few comments here.
I think we go to the next slide here. Is that correct?
Yeah, we don't have the report teed up in a slide, but
Okay. So you got sent a balance sheet, which is essentially a snapshot as of September 30th. And then a revenue and expense report, which covers the 12-month period from October 1 to September 30. You might wonder why we chose that period of time, because it's already the middle of November, but typically our annual meetings have been a little earlier in the calendar than this. So we just kept the same 12-month time frame for this report. There's a lot of detail in these kind of reports, and most people's eyes either gloss over or go cross-eyed when they look at them. So I'll just say a couple things to point out. That 12-month period, we spent more money than we took in, about $37,000 more, which ate into our reserve. And our reserve is less than we would like it to be at the moment. The development committee worked really hard, starting perhaps about a year ago, to see if we could pry some money out of small family foundations in the state of Wisconsin that show interest in environmental stuff. And that's been sort of very disappointingly unproductive. Whether that'll continue to be the case in the future or not, but Brian Pierce particularly, I think we sent out something like 50 applications and we got very little back, which is really disappointing. In fact, we didn't get money from a couple that we'd gotten the year before. Whether this is a reflection of the general state of the economy, I guess time will tell. But the bottom line is we need an infusion of more money from other sources so that we can do all the stuff we want to do in the next year and rebuild our reserve. This kind of situation may be not unusual for a young nonprofit. We're only 5 years old. We started out on day one, as I understand it, with one person donated $100,000 anonymously. So that was a huge start. And we've been trying to keep things going since then, adding a little bit of staff here and there. And we've got great plans for next year and need enough money to get to this time next year with more in the bank than we have right now. There are plans to hire a development staffer to help us bring in more money. And we do need some money to fund that. So it's a little bit of a chicken and egg situation, I guess. The other thing I would raise is the possibility that we could end up getting more money by just having more members. That we all know people who would be candidates to be members. They don't have to be natural resource. They don't have to have a natural resource professional background. They just have to believe in what we're doing. And those of us who are putting time in are good examples of most of us are retirees. To convince someone that I'm putting in my time, can you kick a little money in? Can you join? Help us build up the membership numbers.
I'm going to have to move us along here because we're on a timeline here. So Fred, do you have any comments you want to add to that before we?
yeah, thanks. And thanks for that overview, Bob. I think, we will end the year with a healthy reserve, but as Bob pointed out, it probably won't be as large, or it may not be as large as it has been in years past. And that's really because of some foundation funding we were anticipating this year and budgeting for did not come through. I think the real variable for us is, we've got a lot of ideas and plans that we'll be sharing with you later in this meeting for next year and beyond. And how much of that work we'll be able to do will be significantly dependent on the success of our fall fundraising, which is where 60% of our revenue comes in between October and December. And overall, I think more than 85% of our revenue has traditionally come from individual members like all of you. So we really do need to double down this year. There's a number of strategies in place to do that, but your support is a critical component of all of it.
Do we need a motion to approve the treasurer's report, or can we just accept it?
I would move accepting the treasurer's report. This is Robin.
All right,
I'll support that, Mr. McCaffrey.
all right. All in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
Thank you. And thank you for all the support that everybody online has done to date. It's very heartening to us to know that we have so many supporters, and I'm confident that we'll get over this hurdle this year. So I would look to our next agenda item.
Hey, Tom, this is Robin. We're going to do a really quick audience engagement. I know we're a little behind schedule, so we're going to make it up through this. We're just going to ask you a couple questions so we can get to know you a little bit, get to know where you're from, your background, and what your interests are. So if you would just take 1 minute, I think Sarah's going to queue up a poll that we have, and just go ahead and click the answers, scroll through it as you see it, and we'll give you 60 seconds. It shouldn't be long for you to do. Thank you.
For us. What's your area of expertise? Biological sciences. I'm answering for both of us because
Okay.
we're the same.
Terry, you should mute yourself.
Oh, sorry.
Robin, I'm giving everybody 2 minutes.
Okay. It'll take you a little
Make sure
longer.
you don't walk away from your computers. I only see about 5 people have fully answered everything.
Okay. The last one's really important.
The last one would be a very different question in California, Robin.
Well, I'm an East Coaster, so it was interesting to come out here and see different terminology. But since
Yeah,
we're-
the first time I heard it, it was my, at the time, 5-year-old sister asking where the bubbler was. And I was a teenager from California. And I said, excuse me?
Too funny. Well, one of the things I think is important when you're in meetings like this is to just get a sense of the geographic variables and backgrounds of people. So the information we have, we'll be able to save and go back and reflect on after the meeting too. So.
Okay, I'm gonna give everybody 10 more seconds. And then I'm gonna close the poll. We've got about 57 people weighing in. All right, I am ending the poll. Can you see those results, Robin, to read from
Yeah.
them?
Yeah, so how would you best describe yourself? The highest category is youthful in spirit, less so in body. Our main residency, most people are from South Central, but a fair number of people from North Central Wisconsin. Many of us are active serving on work groups or part of the Science Council, which is great to see, but 31% are not. So that's interesting for folks to think about how you might want to engage with our organization. We have a plethora of people with biological science background, as well as backgrounds in education and physical sciences and social sciences. So that's great to know. Climate change clearly is on the topic of people's interest, as is wildlife management and environmental rules and water resources and environmental education. So it's really a wide breadth of interests that we have. And lastly, I'm very disappointed that Bubbler got 59% and Water Fountain 43%. So I feel, gosh, that was not the outcome I was anticipating. So thanks for showing the results there. Sarah, I also wanted to just remind folks that last Friday you were sent an email that has a link to the Wisconsin Green Fire evaluation and feedback survey. So if you haven't done it yet, please go back and check your emails and respond to that survey. It's really important for you to give us feedback on the programs and activities that we did in 2022, our work from a diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice perspective, our focus areas for the next 5 years, and our communications efforts and products in 2022. So that Sarah has put the a QR code. If you want to just take a snapshot of that, that'll also take you to our survey. So thank you for doing that. It's really helpful for us as an organization. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paul Heinen to continue the program.
Thanks, Robin. I was just saying, as a Milwaukee boy, I could have told you right away that it was Bubbler. I think one of the best things that we had in our last meeting was when we had our aspiring conservation professionals. I think it was Laretha that talked, but almost everybody said, "Was that ever inspiring? Was that nice to see? Was that a cool thing to see happen?" And I think in the last year, since the last meeting, Dolly Ledeen, who I'm going to introduce in a second, has done just a spectacular job. And it's, I don't know, from my perspective, working on policy all the time, to have young people involved with us is very nice. It's just a refreshing thing to do. So first of all, Dolly, thank you. And secondly, do you want to just talk for a minute about our ACP program? And then we're going to have a couple people, young people, talk to us about what they're doing.
Great, thank you, Paul. And I just humbly cannot take credit for this because it was just what I did was invite them and they took it from there. And so I really feel like there are a lot of young people who want to be active in conservation, natural resources, and policy. And I'm glad that we can give them one opportunity to do so. And so we have a small but committed group of students and other aspiring professionals. So we're not limited to people who are currently registered as students, but people who are in one way or another exploring conservation careers or on their way to a career. And they might be of any age, actually. And there's several of us that meet with them and advise them. I want to shout out Nancy Franz, who really also helps guide us and give us ideas and is really helpful with the group as far as another person who's been around a while. But some of the things that they're doing is, or that we're doing, we produce a newsletter that goes to campuses around the state. And I think Jenny was going to show you maybe a slide of the most recent copy of that Conservation's Connection newsletter. There we go. And so we've got a mailing list now of environmental groups and individual students and faculty around the state who get this newsletter, which summarizes some of Green Fire's work, but also other conservation issues and items that people might be interested in. We manage a job board with conservation job opportunities, and Nick Hallbeck coordinates that. And Nick, I think at the current time, is putting in the chat, and there it is, some more information about that job board and how you can help us by letting us know of job opportunities and ideas that you have that we could share with students on a regular basis to let them know what opportunities are out there. In regards to Conservation Connections, we have a student, or former student, but currently a young professional, Isabel Beether, who works at the Milwaukee Zoo. And Isabel is our newsletter editor and is doing a great job with that. In addition to the newsletter and job board, we we're helping to develop our new Conservation Pathways Scholarship Program and serve as mentors for these new students. So all of the students who receive scholarships will not only have a more experienced Green Fire member as a mentor, but also a young aspiring professional. The Aspiring Conservation Professionals Group, ACP, also helps to maintain our social media. They've got some expertise in that. And they help to educate us about conservation concerns of younger people, the needs for cultural competence, and they help us to begin to address social and racial justice in conservation, which is really important to us as an organization. And they help give us a little dose of reality if we're not in tune with things that are current. So I really welcome your thoughts and ideas for how this group could better interact with the broader Green Fire organization. We'll be looking for your ideas and participation. Our current chair of our group is Laretha Jack. Laretha is busy working at DNR now and could not attend tonight, but she's been with us for several years now and has really led the group and kept us going. So anybody else, I know there's several more ACP members who are here. Did I miss anything about our general work and goals? Otherwise, I think Paul is going to introduce a couple of our members to give their thoughts. Thank you.
You bet. And before I do, please mute people. We're getting some background noise that can be bothersome. We've got two ACP young women that are going to talk a little bit about their experiences with Green Fire. The first one I kind of consider to be one of the best ambassadors Green Fire has, Jenny Washam, mainly because lots of events and social media and all the things she does for Green Fire. She's just a spectacular representative for us. So Jenny, take it away.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate that. Hi, everyone. My name is Jenny Washam. As Paul said, I'm the Communications and Outreach Coordinator for Wisconsin's Green Fire. I got started with Green Fire back in the fall of 2020. I was a new grad student, just moved to Wisconsin, and it was peak pandemic. So I was hungry for some networking and connections with some conservation professionals in Wisconsin, trying to get my foothold and understanding what's going on in the world of conservation in Wisconsin. So I plugged in to the very new Aspiring Conservation Professionals work group that fall. And I was able to network and meet some fellow students and aspiring professionals through that group. And then also through that group, I was able to get connected with Green Fire as a larger organization. And one of the most significant aspects of the ACP work group is the mentorship program that I was able to get connected with Adrian Weideman, who is our wildlife work group co-chair. And he is also a wolf biologist. And at the time I was really interested in wolf biology and wolf management, especially in Wisconsin. So we were able to connect over the phone, and he was able to provide me some resources and connections with folks around Wisconsin. And that eventually led to my summer capstone project for my master's program, working with the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission. I also worked with Peter David and Jonathan Gilbert, who are both Green Fire members as well. So that connection was really great. I was able to co-author a paper on the Ojibwe perspectives on the gray wolf hunt in February of 2021. And it was just a great experience. I learned a lot about tribal perspectives and just the holistic approach to conservation in Wisconsin. So in the fall of 2021, I came full-time staff with Green Fire and started managing communications, and have continued to stay plugged in with the ACP work group. And it's just expanded and grown, and I couldn't have managed social media without their help, and created a Twitter and LinkedIn page with their help. So it's just been a great community of people, and Green Fire has really spearheaded my career just out of grad school and trying to come into the field post-pandemic. It's been a little tricky, but Green Fire has been very supportive and helpful through it all. And I probably wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for everybody that I work with and each member who I've collaborated with. So I encourage anybody who's interested in joining or is interested in becoming more involved to reach out, and especially to the students and the younger professionals to really pursue joining the ACP work group and saying yes to any opportunity that might come up. So with that, I will pass it on to Ellen Wagner for Paul to introduce her.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. Thanks for all you do for us. Ellen is also one of those underachievers who, while working on her PhD, she just decided sure she'd help write a Green Fire, co-write of the Green Fire Imbalance of Power paper. And for the last 9 months, Ellen has also been writing that paper. So where she finds the time, I don't know. She'll be getting her PhD and in spring next year. And Ellen, take it away.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I'm Ellen Wagner. I am a current graduate student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, working on my PhD in cell molecular biology, which doesn't exactly fit with conservation biology, but conservation has always been a passion of mine. And over the years during grad school, I've become more interested in science policy. And that's really how I started working with Wisconsin's Green Fire. About a year ago, I was in a service fellowship on campus, and part of that fellowship, we get to work with a community partner, and I was lucky enough to be teamed up with Paul Heinen to work on the newest Opportunities Now paper. And ever since then, I've been really interested in learning more about Wisconsin's Green Fire. I've joined the Contaminants of Emerging Concern work group, and not contributing much to that, but it's been a really great experience just to get to learn about what's going on in real time right now with such an important problem. And, as you know, I'm still in school. I'm eventually going to be trying to find a career in the next few months. It's been really great to be working with Green Fire because it's reaffirmed my interest in conservation policy and really shown like this is a strong interest of mine and something I do want to pursue. And it's been great to get to know people within the group. Paul has been so kind to introduce me to many people as possible. And so I know having everyone in Green Fire as part of my network is just going to make the next steps moving on and to trying to get into conservation policy much easier. Yeah, thank you.
You bet. Wow. Well done, you two. You just got us back exactly on time. So, Fred, do you want to kick off the next stories and updates?
You bet. And thanks, Ellen. Thanks, Jenny. Let me just also briefly mention for those of you who haven't met all of our staff, you've met Jenny Washam, our communication coordinator, and you've just met Paul Heinen, our legislative liaison. Also on the call tonight is Sarah Peterson, our science director. Sarah came on board in May of 2020. And Brianna Newman, who is our administrative and data coordinator. And Brianna just joined us over the summer, but she's responsible for a lot of our backside operation and finances and managing membership and all points in between. So please feel free to reach out to any of us with questions or ideas. So we wanted to just provide tonight a snapshot of some of the program work that we've been involved in this year. And as many of you know, Green Fire, we're really organized as a membership federation in some respects, and almost all of our significant program work is driven by our members. And our members who are career conservation professionals we kind of organize ourselves loosely into work groups. We also create teams to work on emerging issues. We have a lot of fluidity in how and the ways in which Green Fire members become involved. But what that's really reflected in is the very large number of policy issues where we have impact, and you can learn about a lot of those on our website. But tonight, we want to just touch very briefly on 5 that are perhaps most relevant or that we thought might be of most interest. And so Paul's going to just MC a quick series of updates from those of our members who are working on the issues that you can see in front of you here. And Paul, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Fred. I have no idea how John Robinson spent or has any time to even do this 5 minutes today. I don't think I've ever known anybody who, at the local level, he's on the county board, he's on many committees. As you know, there's a PFAS problem there. He serves on the water board. He's just been a fantastic person to have in Greenfire. And I think partially because of him, we have Mark Timke and Jenny Bisecki, and we've started a group, this Chemicals of Emerging Concern, that people just organically have come to. And I serve on I help a couple of these committees, and this one has just been fantastic. So John, tell us how you do it.
Well, I do it with a great team, and thank you for that that intro. Our group was formed. We made it to work group status the last year, but many of the members worked on the PFAS Forever chemicals in Wisconsin as part of the Opportunities Now 2021 through 23 report. And our members include Mark Timke, who's the co-chair, Jim Ballman, former DNR, Jennifer Brzecki, an attorney in Milwaukee, Tom Giroux, Melissa Johnson, Marathon County Solid Waste Manager, RT Krager from Northern Lakes Lab, myself, and then we have support from Ellen Wagner, Paul Heinen, Sarah Peterson, and we're working on getting some new members. But we meet monthly and we review the latest developments in state and federal regulations and trends. And we've spent a lot of time looking at the PFAS strategic roadmap from EPA. And part of that is they're in the process of trying to list 2 PFAS as hazardous waste, which creates impacts to wastewater and in landfills with leachate handling. But we're supportive of that effort. We're tracking funding through the bipartisan infrastructure law, specifically the Safe Drinking Water Act funding that flows through the states and will be allocated to address some of the emerging contaminants along with a separate pot of money. We're tracking the EPA's new proposed health advisory levels for 6 PFAS. They currently have a health advisory of 70 parts per trillion, and they're dropping that to, in 2 cases, less than a part per trillion. We also spend a lot of time trying to learn from other states. Michigan has been a leader in both response actions through their action response team and in their handling of biosolids. We've looked to Maine, California for leadership on product bans and product substitution. But in Wisconsin, we've been focusing in on supporting efforts to develop groundwater, drinking water, and surface water standards. Attending Natural Resource Board meetings, registering and supporting those. The final rules on firefighting foam, limiting the use of firefighting foam with PFAS. We've also been very active in advocacy. We worked with Senator Baldwin's office to try to get discretionary funding for a PFAS action response team. One of the problems in Wisconsin is that once you have a water system go down or a well go down, what do you do next? And we had proposed developing some expertise and working with local governments and communities and trying to respond to that. We were unsuccessful in getting that funding. We also submitted a grant to the Mott Foundation, which also was unsuccessful. But we've continued those efforts into education and try to work with communities and individuals in helping them better understand what PFAS are in terms of the forever chemicals, because they're everywhere. We helped organize tours in Wausau, in Madison in June and September to highlight PFAS issues and contamination. Members have done a very good job of trying to portray to the public that PFAS are everywhere and what products they're in, and begin the discussion about product substitution. Our members are very active in a number of advisory committees, including the DNR's PFAS Technical Work Group, as well as the External Advisory Committee. We're tracking EPA's unregulated contaminant monitoring rule, UCMR 5, where they're going to be monitoring 30 chemicals over the next 2 years, 29 of which are PFAS, which will enlighten us as to the prevalence of the problem. Tracking activities at the Marinette Peshtigo JCI Tyco site. But one of the more important functions that we're doing now is trying to facilitate a better understanding of regulations, and Mark Timke and Jennifer Bezecki are taking the lead and trying to get a green tier charter memorialized under green tier. You can enter into a contract with DNR to basically do a better job of addressing environmental issues. And we're working on how to incentivize and reward communities while protecting the environment in the PFAS areas. We continue to work with other partners in the PFAS stakeholder group, but and support the environmental community in their effort to develop those standards. But we want to also maintain our independence so that when we go to the legislature, we have the credibility with them. So it's been a great group and a great effort and a good year.
And I also think, as a staff person to this John's group, we call it chemicals of emerging concern, because I'm very comfortable knowing that whatever is next, we're ready to address it. So I really appreciate John's leadership and the group together. Next up, there's a farm bill coming up this year, and thankfully we were able to pick off Sarah Walling. When she left the Department of Agriculture, she knows these issues very, very well. And Sarah, you want to kick off the ag and farm bill conversation?
Absolutely. Thanks for the time today, everybody. So yes, as Paul mentioned, I have been helping with Greenfire in my role as a policy advisor for the Alliance for the Great Lakes on agricultural policy issues within Wisconsin, certainly, but across the Great Lakes region. But we have certainly a common interest in ensuring that the next farm bill, we do our best at least to round out the conservation title to ensure that some of the priorities for our groups are being recognized and elevated in the farm bill. For those of you who aren't as familiar with it as some of us are working in the agriculture policy realm, the farm bill really is the opportunity for the federal government. It's their largest funding source for conservation programs on private lands. The programs that are supported through the Farm Bill Title II and the Conservation Title ensures that our farmers and producers have the federal financial and technical support they need to build effective conservation systems within their landscapes, their cropping systems, which are all critical to protecting our water resources and our land and soil health. Farmers and ranchers certainly want to leave their land and water healthy for their next generation of producers. And we want to make sure that a farm bill prioritizes investments in environmental stewardship that are necessary to help our farmers and ranchers to do just that, improve our rivers, streams, and lakes water quality through the cropping systems that they are incorporating additional regenerative ag type of practices, etc. So I have been leading an effort with a coalition of other national and regional environmental NGOs with Greenfire as well, and then similarly focusing in on making sure that our state level partners within Greenfire, but certainly across the environmental organizations within Wisconsin, are also very aware of and invested in advocacy for Farm Bill prioritization on a few topics. So I'm going to go through those kind of quickly today. If you have any questions, maybe we'll have a chance at the end, but this is an ongoing conversation and will last into next year. And I'll get to that in just a second. But basically, there are four main focuses and priorities that we're looking at to incorporate into the revisions to the 2023 Farm Bill. And that is to prioritize programs that really focus in on providing water quality outcomes. So some of you may be familiar with some of the programs like EQIP, which is the Environmental Quality Improvement Program. And that provides cost share to farms to implement various conservation practices within their landscape, everything from manure storage lagoon construction to paying for nutrient management plans and cover crops, the conservation stewardship, conservation securities program, as well as the CRP and things like that are also all laid out in here. When it comes to the cost share programs, we're especially interested in making sure that the federal government through its USDA NRCS programs mainly are prioritizing the funding go to practices that we know to have water quality improvement outcomes associated with them, and to require that recipients of those dollars demonstrate what that water quality improvement based on a cover crop practice installation, for instance, is going to bring, and then prioritizes funding to pay for those, to prioritize those types of practices on the biggest bang for your buck kind of a concept through those programs. We're also working very hard on modernizing the crop insurance process and programs. Right now, there is a lot of disincentive, relatively speaking, to protect water quality relative to our crop insurance program, because it's really based on yields and maintaining yields that are expected. And so insurance is there to pay for when, you know, extreme, usually extreme weather events and such are impacting the ability for a crop to grow successfully. But we think that there can be a lot of additional add-ons to crop insurance programs to, again, include provisions that would prioritize and motivate landowners to incorporate more protections for water quality. An example is that prior to a couple of years ago, crop insurance wasn't going to pay out if you grew a cover crop ahead of your corn crop, for instance, because the concern was that the cover crop might be reducing your ability to gain that yield. So they're kind of counterintuitive to achieving water quality goals. And so that's something we're looking to remedy with some of the items that we are prioritizing for Farm Bill revisions. Another one is limiting funding for livestock operations. There's a requirement within the Environmental Quality Incentive Program that half of the dollars that are available each year nationally need to go to operations that are livestock producers. And while we recognize there's certainly a lot of issues around manure management and water quality and that interplay that need to be rectified, unfortunately, a lot of the dollars for EQIP right now that heads to livestock operations are going to pay for things like manure storage lagoons and manure transfer systems and barnyard cleanups. And as an example, in Wisconsin, our state cost share dollars won't pay for our largest farms, our CAFOs, our confined animal feeding operations. We won't pay cost share for those kinds of things. The notion is that we'll pay smaller farms to help them with their environmental issues, but that the larger farms should be able to support those investments on their own. And we'd like to see a similar thing being translated into the Farm Bill programs. So while we certainly want to see livestock operations have access to cost share dollars to support regenerative agricultural practices, low disturbance manure injection, et cetera, we definitely want to see those dollars move away from some of those structural practices like manure storage lagoons, et cetera, that really don't have a really direct tie to water quality improvement. And then lastly, is we've been looking at doubling our conservation spending. So about 75% of the applications that go toward that environmental quality incentives program for cost sharing for conservation practice implementation on farms, 75% of those applications have gone unmet year after year for the last several years. So the notion is that there's just way too many asks for the amount of dollars that is available. Again, it kind of ties back to that last thing I mentioned, because manure storage lagoons cost a lot more in cost sharing than paying a farmer to incorporate cover crops on an annual basis into their farm system. So we just want to share the wealth a little bit, but also expanding the pie that's available. However, we're also doing a lot of critical analysis, as was mentioned actually just earlier, to see how some of the recent federal bills like the Infrastructure Recovery Act was able to bring huge chunks of dollars to agriculture through that bill. And so recognizing that maybe asking for a doubling of conservation funding isn't the right time anymore. So we're kind of rethinking that and trying to assess what funding is available, and then hoping to kind of repitch our prioritization around those dollars to, again, focus on prioritizing cost share dollars funneling toward practices that are going to change the behavior on the farm, the crop management systems, nutrient management processes and decisions to best protect our water quality. So that's an effort that I've been leading up on behalf of Green Fire, as well as with this national coalition, and helping Green Fire be as well positioned with the national advocacy network on this issue as possible. As I mentioned, it's a 2023 Farm Bill. In theory, they're supposed to be done every 5 years, and generally speaking have, although occasionally they'll be a little late. There's some talk and rumor mill generated right now that we may not have a 2023 Farm Bill, and it may be something more like a 2024 Farm Bill. There's some pros and cons to that, which I won't get into here, but in some ways, if we are looking for a really dramatic shift in some of the policies and programs built into the Farm Bill, I'm kind of okay with it being a little bit delayed, because I think that provides more opportunity for some of our new legislators that have come in the last election cycle here to get up to speed and introduce legislation that may be there in the future, then in the next year, incorporate into what will become the next Farm Bill. So we will be continuing to keep ties to the national coalition where their talking points are. In the meantime, we've been meeting with members of both of the House and Senate Congressional Agriculture committees to talk about what our priorities are and to counterbalance against some of what the agriculture industry's priorities are as well for the Farm Bill. So that effort will continue to be ongoing, and it will continue to bring in individuals from Green Fire that are interested in joining this discussion group and work toward the potential for actionable items by Green Fire and our members over the coming year to continue our advocacy efforts on Farm Bill revisions that prioritize water quality outcomes. So that's all I had for today, Paul. Thanks for the time.
Thanks, Sarah. I told you we were lucky to have her. Also lucky to have Adrian Weideman, who I hardly need to introduce to most people. He's our national, probably international expert on wolves. Adrian, what's happening?
Thanks for having me, Paul. Yeah, we've had a busy year this year with wolf activities. We started the year with wolves going back on the federal endangered species list on February 10th of this year, which meant the state lost its management authority, and we're back to a federally managed species. But we anticipate that delisting will probably again occur sometime within the next few years. Winter wolf surveys were completed by the end of March this year. Some of us from Green Fire are involved in those. We did have, as was alluded to earlier, a Green Fire event at Lake Owen this last summer at the Lewis family property to raise funds for wolves, for wolf conservation, as well as this kind of a social event. We did have a Green Fire field event this last summer at Forest Lodge in Cable. We spent part of an afternoon, evening, going out wolf howling and some discussions and talk about wolves the next morning. And in our wolf howl survey, Fred was the person who was able to get the wolves to howl, although the first wolves to howl, or the first response he got were from Sandhill cranes. So I don't know if that says anything about Fred's wolf howl, but he did get wolves to howl at him. We did have the fish, or DNR, did come out with their final count for this year. Now, they completed the count at the end of March, but they didn't come out with the count until September 30th this year. Population estimation of 972 wolves, which was about a 14% decline from last year. The department now is going with the new occupancy modeling system, which is a little bit more liberal in its estimation of wolf numbers than the previous minimum counting system, but suggesting the population was probably at levels and it was similar to about 2012, 2013. So there has been a bit of a decline in the population as we had anticipated after the February 2021 hunt, but it wasn't as drastic as some people had feared. Several of us did give presentations at the International Wolf Symposium that was held in early part of October. And the biggest news right now is the Wisconsin DNR has just come out with their draft wolf plan on the 10th of November, and we've got 60 days which to comment on that plan. So that plan, I was the advisor with Tim Van Deelen for Green Fire, but we did have other Green Fire members that served representing other organizations, including Eric Olson and Randy Jurwitz that represented Timberwolf Alliance. Peter David represented Lifwick, Jody Habish Sinkin, and Diane Kane represented the Sierra Club. So we did have a lot of input into that plan from Green Fire members. The input from the stakeholders ended in fall of 2021, but it's taken the department this long to come up with a plan, which was probably good because they took more time doing it, and they did do an extensive public attitude survey during the same time period. So it's got a lot of public input into it. Some of the things that are really useful in the plan, that some of the things that we had advocated for, including elimination of a numeric goal and focusing on ecological benefits of wolves, which is one of the things that we pushed for with Green Fire. There is more of a focus on ecological benefits in the zones, especially zones 1, 2, and 5, which are core wolf areas across the state. The DNR is proposing buffer areas around Indian reservations where there would be reduced wolf harvest to protect packs from reservation lands. One of the other things we had advocated for. There's some overall modifications in zones that would better protect core wolf habitat, at the same time allow better control on problem packs at the edge of wolf range. There's a lot of emphasis on education and outreach. There's efforts to reduce illegal kill of wolves, and there's a commitment to science and research in this plan. A couple of things in the plan that are a bit of concern, I guess. It does, the plan does try to reduce numbers of permits for quota permits for wolves. And in some ways that's useful to reduce overharvest, but there's also a concern that it could extend the longer wolf hunting and trapping season, which would create other problems if hunting and trapping seasons extend into the breeding season of wolves and into the time period that surveyors are doing track surveys, which might be disruptive. There's also plans in the plan to allow training for dogs that are going to be used for wolf hunting starting after the firearm deer season, and that would extend until all zones are closed across the state. That there's also the similar concerns there that might be disruptive to wolf packs, and that could cause some difficulty in doing surveys. And the department has decided to use just one advisory committee. We had recommended that separate science and stakeholder committees be created. But there's a couple of things in the plan too that DNR cannot do. DNR does not have the authority to decide not to hold wolf hunting and trapping season. DNR does not have the authority to eliminate the use of dogs for wolf hunting. The DNR does not have authority to decide when hunting should start. It only can end seasons when quotas have been reached in certain harvest zones. And the DNR does not have the authority to eliminate such things as whether dogs and livestock would be compensated for. So in general, it's kind of a mix. We're going to be creating some responses from Green Fire, but urge folks that have an interest in wolf conservation to either directly go on the DNR's website and make your comments known. And please share those with us, with me if you can. I'll be writing comments for Green Fire in general on recommendations on this draft wolf plan. So I think there's a lot of good things in it. It looks like DNR did listen to us. There are some concerns, but we do want DNR to hear from people that people support the direction DNR is going on this wolf plan.
Hey, Adrian, I forgot. What was the name of that international award you got a month ago?
Speaks for Wolves, I guess, was the name of the
Not bad.
an award. Yeah, the International Wolf Center granted me. Yeah, thank you, Paul.
Well,
Congratulations.
yeah, my God, thank you.
Just a quick note, we're remarkably on time so far. So following our last two presenters, we should have a couple of minutes to field some questions. So please keep in mind if there's questions you want to ask any of the five presenters to follow up on. We haven't seen a lot of Keith Leopold in the last 6 or 8 months, mainly because he wrote the Wisconsin Energy Plan. Really proud to have him as a Green Fire member. And if you got any questions about energy policy, Keith knows the answer. Keith, go ahead.
I may know the answer. Thank you, Paul. Thanks very much for the invitation. I greatly appreciate it. Governor Evers issued Executive Order 38 in 2019, which called for the creation of a clean energy plan for the state of Wisconsin. And if it also, that executive order also created the Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy in Wisconsin. And Maria Redmond was hired as the director of the Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy. And she was one who led the effort to develop that plan, the Clean Energy Plan. I was one of the primary authors of the plan. But there were many, many stakeholders and many, many organizations who deserve a lot of credit. And I think, should be very proud and view this plan as certainly a significant step forward and a win this past year, including, of course, Wisconsin's Green Fire. There are, if you go to the website of the Wisconsin Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy, you can find two documents. One is the full plan. It's about 170 pages. It has roughly 100 different strategies for programs and policies to promote clean energy. But you can also find a 16-page summary of the plan, which I think is actually very, very helpful. I'm just going to go through a few of the goals, objectives of the plan so you can get a sense of what it is. And then I'm just going to talk about a few of the initial policies and programs that are being developed by the Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy as part of this plan. So there's a bunch of different objectives that you'll see in the plan, but to name a few, the first one that's listed is to help Wisconsin get on the pathway to achieve the goal of having 100% carbon-free electricity consumption in the state of Wisconsin by the year 2050. That goal, by the way, was also part of Executive Order 38. Another one of the goals for this plan is to put Wisconsin on a path to do its part proportionately to meet the Paris Climate Agreement in terms of carbon emission reductions. Another one is to reduce the disproportionate impact of the generation and use of electricity on low-income communities and communities of color. And equity and justice is a really big emphasis throughout this plan. The fourth listed goal is to maximize the creation and equitable access to clean energy jobs in the state of Wisconsin. I'll say a little more about that shortly. There's a few other objectives, but you get the general drift of what this plan is. I think the best way to sort of sum up what this plan is it's a plan to expedite the transition from our fossil fuel economy in Wisconsin to a clean energy economy and do it in the most equitable and just way that we can. There are a total of 71 what are called immediate strategies, things that could and should be done immediately if there's enough staff and resources to do that. There's another roughly 20 high impact strategies you'll see in this clean energy plan, which would have that high impact is measured mostly by carbon emission reductions. And there's, if you look at the 16-page version, you'll see 7 really broad strategies, which are the things that the Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy will be working on out of the gate. And I'm going to spend the last couple of minutes that I'll talk on a couple of those. But one other thing about the purpose of the plan I just want to mention is that it's a clean energy plan. It's not a climate action plan. That's not the same thing. It is only addressing, it addresses climate change in a big way, but only the energy related greenhouse gas emissions. And there are a lot of other greenhouse gas emissions in the state of Wisconsin. I point that out because Wisconsin doesn't have a climate action plan. And I think, it'd be very appropriate to, to push Wisconsin to develop and publish and follow a climate action plan. So some of the programs and policies that have been teed up first, and these are decisions made by Governor Evers. One is something called an Equity First program. And basically, it's a very comprehensive clean energy program to put as many resources as possible into developing clean energy systems and providing clean energy technologies to families in communities of color and to businesses run by communities of color. And it's really exciting. it's one of the things that is being that money has been acquired to begin implementation of, and the groups Slipstream and Illume Energy and Elevate Energy out of Chicago, those three organizations are partnering to take some of the first steps to put that program into play, and I'd be happy to talk more about it if folks are interested. There's also been a big emphasis on clean energy workforce development, and this is something that's led by the agency, the Workforce Development Department in Wisconsin, and it's going to include defining what clean energy jobs are, taking an inventory of all of the employers of clean energy jobs, so figuring out what the need is for workforce. Defining and laying out all the various pathways for individuals to become qualified to do work in terms of clean energy development. And there's again a major emphasis on looking at having those jobs created in communities of color and pathways for members of those communities to get into those jobs. The third one of the sort of immediate programs is focused on public and private clean energy development and clean energy goals. One of the proposed goals is to get a 60% reduction of carbon emissions in Wisconsin below 2005 levels by the year 2030, and to do that through the development of renewable resources and other clean energy technologies. I'm gonna stop there. There's a number of other immediate strategies that will be employed, but I just wanted to give you a flavor of some of the things that are being addressed right away. There have been a couple of wins out of this plan already. There's a big emphasis on carbon emissions from buildings and having much better, much more advanced building codes. And the Department of Safety and Professional Services has already created a council that the plan calls for, which is a council of building experts. It's called the Wisconsin Advisory Council of Building Sustainability, to get more building expertise and energy expertise into the code development for Wisconsin. Another thing that's already happened is the governor has created an Office of Environmental Justice. And by the way, they're looking for the hiring of the director of that first Office of Environmental Justice for Wisconsin will be happening hopefully by the end of this year. And so they're looking for candidates now. Last thing I'll say is that I know that Paul is going to be saying a few words about elections in a few minutes and how elections matter. And this clean energy plan and the Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy is a really great example of why elections matter. If it wasn't for Governor Evers' success in the elections, this program and this plan would probably be sitting on a shelf for a long time. But Maria, I know, is very excited to dive in and really go to town on the implementation of this clean energy plan. And again, Wisconsin's Green Fire deserves a lot of credit to help put the state in that position. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Keith. It sounds like I'm bragging a lot, but the fact of the matter is our next presenter on the public trust doctrine, Michael Kane, wrote a lot of the laws and continues to support the laws that are protecting our waters. I know that because people call and say, can I have Michael Kane's phone number? He's constantly involved in just all water protection issues because he knows them so well. So he's going to give us a little of that information right now. Michael?
Well, thank you, Paul. Jenny, do you have my slides? Can you put them up? Thank you. So I made Paul and Fred nervous when I sent 9 slides in yesterday. And they keep telling me I only have 5 minutes, so I will skim over this. I was an attorney at Wisconsin DNR for 35 years, dealing with public trust and wetland issues. And the public trust doctrine grows out of the Wisconsin Constitution that all waters in the state are held for the citizens. And so I'm proud to say that I and the other people in our work group many of them are professionals who work with DNR on these issues, are continuing to do this work. Next slide. One of the things that has happened over the last couple of years with high water levels on the Great Lakes that we've been working on is property owners needed to protect their shorelines. DNR decided they didn't have enough staff to really supervise that work, and so there were over 800 projects done on the Great Lakes. The concrete blocks were put down. This is in southeast Wisconsin. This fill on the lake bed was to protect a cottage up in on Washington Island. Next slide. The Department of Natural Resources is currently doing what they call a Dora Peninsula strategic analysis to try to figure out how to deal with these issues going forward in the future when there's high water levels. As many of you know, we've had massive fluctuations from very low water to high water in the Great Lakes. And that's caused a lot due to climate change in large part, and that's caused a lot of impacts on the shorelines. And so we are working on this strategic analysis and trying to work with the Department of Natural Resources and other groups to make sure that these are properly monitored going forward. Next slide. Last legislative session, there was a bill, SB 900, that was pushed through by the builders, the realtors, commercial builders, and the League of Municipalities that would allow municipalities to authorize commercial and residential development on filled lakebed and riverbed in Wisconsin. We opposed it along with 13 other NGOs and the Wisconsin tribal governments. We requested a veto from Governor Evers, which he granted. But this had the potential of affecting 64,000 miles of riverbank, 820 miles of Great Lakes shorelines, and tens of thousands of miles of inland lakeshore. We're going to be working on this issue over the next year. It will be back. Next slide. As many of you know who have been in Milwaukee, there's lots of public development along the Milwaukee waterfront, from Calatrava to the Art Museum, the Discovery Museum, Bradford Beach, etc. But there have been a lot of issues that have been arisen in Milwaukee, and we've been involved in those issues, dealing with access to the waterfront, commercial development along the waterfront, and social justice issues. It's one of the most integrated areas along the shoreline. And there are serious concerns about some commercial development that would limit that. Next slide, please. There's also currently a development proposal along the Lake Monona shoreline here in Madison. There's a case that went to the Wisconsin Supreme Court in 1957, two cases actually, one of which dealt with the Monona Terrace development, which is pictured here, which is on lakebed, which defined what sort of commercial or municipal structures could be on lakebed. Next slide. But there's always been a lot of pressure. When I was an attorney at DNR, we had an average of about one commercial development or residential development per month go across my desk. This is a case up in Madeline Island, Trudeau versus state of Wisconsin, where Mr. Trudeau decided he was going to build condominiums on lakebed. He was told by the department and local government that it was lakebed and he couldn't build them there. After 5 years of litigation, they were removed from the lakebed. We're going to see more of this type of development. The bill that was proposed last session would have authorized potentially a lot of residential and commercial development on lake beds. We think this is a significant issue. We're also dealing on lots of other issues, but this is one that we will be tracking and working with the Board of Commissioners of Public Lands, DNR, and other groups over the next year. Next slide. Some people look at this and say, well, this is anti-development. We had proposals in the late 1980s when the city of Milwaukee was, the river was finally cleaned up after many years of pollution. The city had turned its back on the river, and the city approached DNR and said, we want to put floating barges in the river and put in the Milwaukee River and put restaurants and bars on those so we get the public back to the river. They were told that it was unconstitutional, but the Department of Natural Resources and the Board of Commissioners of Public Lands and the citizens worked with them to develop a river walk. And this is a model that is now being emulated in other parts of the state. There's been $1.5 billion worth of development, commercial and residential development along that river walk, and it's a great success story. And we're working with groups to to try to make sure that this is the sort of thing that happens in other areas around the state. Next slide. So these are our waters. We are working with DNR, with other groups, to try to preserve them. And if any of you have questions about the things that we're working on, or if you see developments that are occurring, We have constant contact with the Board of Commissioners of Public Lands, DNR, and other citizen groups. And we'd be happy to continue working on this. We're also doing work with the Department of Natural Resources. 2 of our members have been invited to be on a technical advisory committee that's working on new regulations dealing with wetlands, shoreline development, et cetera. So if any of you have interest in those areas, both if you have expertise or if you just have interest, get in touch with us and we can give you information on what we know about what's going on there. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Michael. Fred, where are we at?
We've got a couple minutes. So Keith, Sarah, Adrian, Michael, John, thank you. I feel like we just heard 5 TED Talks and they were all really good. So we appreciate that. We've got about 5 minutes. So I just want to open the floor. You've heard a lot of talking from us. For anyone on the call, do you have a question you want to field to any of the folks who just spoke? If so, you could either drop it in the chat or raise your hand. If you go to the little reactions menu on the bottom of your screen, you could pop your hand up and we'll give you the floor. I see Nick Holbach has a hand raised. Nick?
Thanks. I had a question for Sarah, if she doesn't mind. She started to talk a little bit about 2 different kind of almost opposing ideas, which is one is balancing, or one is sort of a bang for your buck approach to funding, conservation efforts under the Farm Bill, which would be, more the larger operations. And then one was trying to support the smaller farms that are less likely to be able to fund those kinds of things on their own. So I apologize if I kind of missed it. I'm not as familiar with the Farm Bill issues, but if you could just go into a bit more detail about what's being done to balance those 2 ideals.
Yeah, I apologize. It was probably my communication style that got the confusion situated, because I think they're not opposing, actually. I think what we're talking about is ensuring that the money is spread as far as we can, and doing that by limiting the movement of cost share dollars to our largest farms in the country, and certainly in the state. And that's what we do in the state as well, with the way that we prioritize our cost share dollars. Is we just don't cost share to CAFO operations whatsoever with any state dollars. Federal programs don't have that same restriction, however. And so because of that, large volumes of dollars go to pay for really high cost items on large farms like manure storage lagoons that we want to see, deprioritized at least. I know that it would be nearly impossible to try to fully restrict cost share funding at the federal level to our largest livestock operations. And I think there's good reason to provide some level of support, but certainly being able to prioritize the types of practices that do ensure more, have a much higher likelihood of generating a water quality improvement response, or water quality and protection is what we're looking for. So, just putting manure in a storage lagoon doesn't necessarily translate to a water quality protection. Whereas, being able to cost share grassed waterways or riparian buffers or more regenerative agricultural cropping systems are really what we want the federal government to focus in on when they provide these extremely large buckets of dollars to agriculture for conservation.
I would just reemphasize Sarah's point there, that folks who have worked in farm conservation for 30 years have just struggled to figure out where the resources were going to come to achieve and address some of these big problems that we have. And we're seeing right now with these federal bills, just an infusion of funding, unlike anything most of us have seen in a generation. So it really is an exciting time. We've probably got time for one more question, but I don't see any. So if folks are still thinking, that's fine. I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Peterson, our science director, for a minute, just to give an overview on different ways folks can get involved with our work groups and with Greenfire.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that we have a lot of folks on the call that may be new to Green Fire or, may have attended a call or two here and there. We continually have needs from our various work groups, which the 5 speakers just talked a bit about the work that they're doing within the organization. I interface quite a bit with a lot of the folks that chair our work groups, and we continually have opportunities for people to engage. So I urge you, if you are, interested in finding out more about a particular work group, to reach out and ask, and we can see where the fit is, as well as connect you to the co-chairs, because there's always particular opportunities to engage around comment letters, opportunities to help weigh in on various projects or initiatives that we are launching. So I'll drop my email into the chat, and you can also reach out to Fred Clark as well to plug in.
Thanks, Sarah. Well, we're gonna move on to the next item, and all of us know that we had an important election last week. As we always do, we want to remind everyone that Wisconsin's Green Fire is a fiercely nonpartisan organization. We work with anybody who has potential to make change, and if we've worked actively with the Evers administration on many fronts, as you've learned today. However, if Tim Michels had somehow managed to be elected governor last week, we would already be talking about ways that we could work with the Michels administration. So we're working with anyone who's got potential to make a difference. And Paul, you are going to give us your best overview of where we're headed now that we know.
It was very nice to see quite a bit of press afterwards, after all kind of the negative press about what bad things were going to happen, to say, and I quote, "It was nice return to democratic norms," which is kind of an overall take on how the elections went. It was very smooth elections. The national press has actually called Wisconsin out for its almost 60% of our voters showed up statewide. If you want to compare that to some of the lower states, a state like West Virginia had 10%. And there was a few others in the 12, 15%. 60% of Wisconsin's voters have showed up. So again, something to be proud of. Just so you know, kind of the layout of what is going to happen now because of the election, the Republicans gained more seats in the both Senate and the Assembly. But one of the things that a lot of people talked about was, would they be able to gain enough seats to stop Tony Evers from vetoing bills? You need 2/3 in both houses for that to happen. It happened in the Senate. There were 22 Republicans and 11 Democrats. It did not happen in the Assembly, where there are 64 Republicans and 35 Democrats, and they would have needed 66. So you are kind of back to exactly where we were last session. There's a lot of the lobbyists who talk about how many millions of dollars did we spend to change nothing. But the fact of the matter was that it was a really intense election, and so this is what we have now. Be careful when you hear about things being overridden. Next session, you'll hear those words, because the Senate will likely override many bills. But remember, you have to have both houses. So it's unlikely that vetoes will happen in both houses. Young people showed up, about 27%. So congratulations, finally. Oftentimes we hear about, before elections that young people want this or want that, but then they don't show up. They don't come and vote. And 27% is the second best, second highest since 2018. Oh, I mean, 2018 was the first highest. So it was kind of nice to see that. The state budget will be the first thing up in 2023, as the governor and legislature will be sworn in January. And so we'll be back, you working on all the issues you've been hearing about, and particularly the budget is the bill with the most importance because it's what funds things. And boy, it'll be nice not to have any more elections for, oh no, the next one just started. I literally got today my first email about the Supreme Court race, which will be up in 2023. An important race. Everybody should be engaging and thinking about it because it will decide whether the court is more conservative or more liberal. So vote however you want, but engage and vote. That's about it for the midterm. The one thing I do want to say that Fred kind of mentioned is we are at a completely paradigm shifting time with the amount of federal money coming in. And recall that not a lot has happened with it. It's over 5 years that a number of the Biden's bills have gone through. And we have and are engaged in many different areas where we are helping the department, where most of this bill is going through, Department of Natural Resources, help spend these funds. Really upbeat time for the next 4 years. So thank you. That's it for that, Fred.
All right, thanks, everyone. Thank you, Paul, for tracking all of this. And yeah, I think the work in the Capitol is one of our most important focus areas, and we're already beginning to map out. Actually, Sarah and Paul will be working in January and February to make outreach to committee chairs and also to newly elected legislators, and we'll be using that opportunity to introduce those folks to some of our work group leads, some of whom you've heard from. So we want Green Fire to be a resource for decision makers, agency folks, and conservation partners around the state. And where you see opportunities for us to play that role, we really hope to hear from you. So Paul and I are just going to tee up a little bit of background on our most recent policy piece, our Opportunities Now paper, Imbalance of Power. And as Paul mentioned earlier, that this is a project that we actually started early this year. And what we were really trying to do here was wrap our arms around what are the systemic causes behind the just string of what many of us would view as conservation failures or environmental failures in the last decade, that for most of us, we feel strongly that they run very counter to the conservation tradition that Wisconsin has been known for most of the 20th century. So this paper was really an attempt to capture the causes of the changes that we're seeing now and the outcomes, and really make recommendations for how to improve and restore the kind of balance that we think is essential to having an effective functioning state government. We could go to the next slide, please. So this work involved both a close look at current state laws, the way the administrative rule process works. For those of you not familiar with administrative rules, you can think of them as sort of the DNA that guides the work of state government. And we really dove deep into some of those very detailed legal issues. To do that, we had a lot of help from some of our members who are attorneys and former attorneys with the Legislative Council. But we also profiled Wisconsin citizens who are affected directly in important ways by some of these changes that have, really, I think, helped erode Wisconsin's conservation tradition. Next slide, please. So one of the things that you'll find in this paper is our sort of in the weeds assessment of what the administrative rule process looked like in 2008. And next slide, please. And the way that process has been changed through a number of different pieces of legislation since then that have made it almost a non-functional process. And most people can be forgiven for not following how administrative rules are developed and approved, and you shouldn't have to, honestly. But the fact of the matter is that because this process is non-functional right now, we're not able to address some of the most critical environmental issues facing the state, like PFAS, like nitrates contamination. like many other issues that we didn't even have the space to touch on in this report. But I think as a result of this work that involved contributions from members of our board, from a large number of Green Fire members, I think we've helped people better understand sort of the reasons behind our lack of environmental progress, and ways in which we might help restore that balance. So with that, Paul, I'll turn it over to you.
Let me tell you two stories about rules, PFAS and nitrates. PFAS is not the first major pollutant we've dealt with in the state of Wisconsin. As a matter of fact, Todd Ames, the ex-deputy secretary of DNR, always started his PFAS speeches during the year that he was there with, yeah, we're dealing with industries who are saying it's too expensive, attorneys that are saying it's too much liability, you can't do it, on and on. Oh no, hold it. That was Mercury in 1970. Okay, let me go back here. It was these industries we're talking about, and then he does much better than I do. But he goes, oh no, hold it. That was 1980, and that was all the carb. CFCs in the 90s, sulfur dioxide, acid rain. We have a process, the rulemaking process that Fred was talking about, that we identify problems, we get groups together, I'm saying we, because the state of Wisconsin gets the group together, works with the health departments, and finds out what a number would be to help protect people. And then that goes to the Natural Resources Board and the legislature. It's happened hundreds of times. And that was before 2010. Now, on PFAS, here we have, there was a group of 3 rules that was put in. One, the board simply didn't vote on. The other one, they raised the standard. And one, they accepted the department's suggestions. Just not right. I mean, it's our water that we're drinking about, or that we're talking about. So very, very frustrating. But almost not as frustrating as what happened with nitrates. Much like the process that we use for PFAS, DNR updates water pollution rules all the time. And the ones in particular that nitrates were in, we do every 5 years, except we haven't done them since 2006. And that's because of a lot of staffing issues and stuff, but they've come up throughout the decade of 2010 to now. And because of the way that the new rules and laws are put together, there are so many restrictions put on the department that unless they make this rule in a certain amount of time, it goes away and they have to restart it. And there are financial things, like if it's more than $10 million, then it has to go to the legislature and they have to pass a law. $10 million to protect people from nitrates pollution is nothing. Yeah, it's a lot of money, but why would we be polluting our waters? So indeed, that's what happened with nitrates, is it came up to a point where the department just simply made the decision, we're taking the rule back. Because A, we're going to lose, and B, we can't afford to pay to do the economic analysis. So we are in a real bad place, and we need to make some changes. There are 71, I think, recommendations I'm sorry, 30 recommendations on page 30 and 31. So if you want to go and find out what to do, go back there. But the key thing is to engage. Just stay engaged. The legislature needs to know that. There's issues, of course, with the Natural Resources Board and people that have not gotten off the board. So unless we stay engaged, they can continue to do these kind of things. And I know that we can, if we continue to stay at it, we can change them. So that's what we've got on elections. Fred?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Questions or comments on this piece of work or suggestions from any of you about where we should go next on this topic? Okay, well, we have seen a lot of good feedback and heard a lot of good feedback from our members and from the media and from partners about this work. And so this is not the last of it. And One other, I guess, observation I would make, in this publication, we really pointed to some critical public health related issues that Paul just described to focus on, but in no way are the impacts of these changes in law that have really handcuffed executive branch agencies limited to those issues. And if we talk to our colleagues who work in fish and wildlife and forest management, over at the Department of Ag, Trade, Consumer Protection, or at any other state agency, you're seeing the same almost chilling effect of this process that's almost impossible to manage for agencies to develop new rules, which really makes it impossible for those agencies to address new and emerging issues. And this is something that ultimately affects every Wisconsin citizen. So I think we are the in the weeds kind of organization that was perfectly built to try to address an issue like this, and we're going to keep working on it.
Fred, if I might add a little bit to what you're talking about, particularly in relation to PFAS, all around us, Michigan, Illinois, and Minnesota are way light years ahead on their PFAS regulations than Wisconsin is. And, we started down the path, and I think someone mentioned we passed one rule, but several didn't pass. What really disturbed me the most is we ignored the advice of our health professionals in the standard that we adopted of 70 parts per million for PFOA and PFAS. And that's disturbing that the board and the policymakers decided to ignore the science that was presented to them and go with a higher standard. And then on the groundwater standard, which protects all the private wells in the states, it was the game of chutes and ladders. We exceeded the 3-year time frame, and so the rule process has to start all over and go through the same process, arduous process, to adopt a standard and face the same problems that we did for the drinking water standard. So it's really disheartening to see that process unfold on something as important as human health and water quality.
Let me just say that the department has started that though, but you're absolutely right, Tom. We'll see what goes on in 2.5 years.
Yep, it's a game of chutes and ladders.
Yep.
Yeah. And in the face of overwhelming public support for action on these problems.
Yep.
Very good. Well, let's move to our last topic tonight. We want to look ahead with all of you and close the formal part of the meeting on a forward-looking note. So we're 5 years old this year. In fact, it was September of 2017 that Green Fire was officially formed. Terry Dalton's and brainchild with support from her husband, Jeff Wilson, and a whole lot of other founding members who are on the call tonight. And we've got a lot to be proud of, a lot of accomplishments to look back on. And our board decided earlier this year that now was really an important time for us to take stock. So beginning early in 2022, we kind of designed and launched a strategic planning process to allow us to do that. And we engaged a consultant, Darren Harris, who knew us well, who helped us design and facilitate a planning process. But importantly, in addition to our board of directors and our staff, we engaged the members of our Wisconsin Green Fire Science Council in that effort. And for those of you that are not familiar with that group, late last year, we formalized advisory body within Green Fire that we call our Science Council. And if you go to our website, you can find the Science Council page and see the, forgive me, I've forgotten the number, Sarah, maybe you can drop it in the chat, but the 50-some Green Fire members who we have appointed to the Science Council based on their expertise and experience and contributions. A huge amount of collective talent there. And we invited those folks to be part of this planning process. We did a lot of work on June 6th and 7th at Rib Mountain State Park in Wausau in a planning retreat with that group. And if you can go to the next slide, Jenny, I just want to share a few of the highlights that have come out of our now formalized strategic plan. Number one is that we took a look at our mission and vision and revised it in a way that we felt better reflected the way we want to present green fire to the world and the way we want to inspire ourselves. And I think the most important language here that I think we look at every day is advancing science-informed analysis and policy solutions that address Wisconsin's greatest conservation challenges. And it's not that we weren't trying to do that before, but we felt that this really captured the direction that all of us want to see this organization go. If we can go to the next slide, please. So along with that mission and vision, we identified 4 key goals. And I'm going to just highlight those here briefly. And within each of these goals that I'm going to highlight, there's a lot of additional strategies that are built into that. So we're kind of skimming the peaks here. But first off, we want to, and we have very strong agreement on this. If you know green fire, you know that we have tackled a hugely divergent range of issues based on the expertise that we have. And that can really feel incoherent in some ways, while people try to understand how it is we could be experts on PFAS and timber wolves at the same time. So the guidance there and the goal is that we establish program priorities that reflect our most important challenges while giving ourselves flexibility to respond to emerging and critical issues. And we're right now in the midst of refining and sort of finalizing our description of those program priorities. And in fact, members of our science councils are having calls this week where we really dive deep on these issues. But I'm just going to name the 5 things that we're really focused on right now. Climate change and green fire's ability to contribute to climate science, and especially climate adaptation and resilience, as well as greenhouse gas mitigation opportunities through renewable energy. We've identified farmland and the contribution of farms and agricultural lands to conservation and of soil and water is another key program priority. And members of our environmental rules work group have a tremendous amount of agricultural experience that they're kind of focused on in that issue. Contaminants of emerging concern. As John described, we've got a truly powerhouse work group there with some deep and diverse expertise that is already contributing substantially both to state policy and to the work of our partners. And we are well positioned to continue that work. Conservation of biodiversity. You know that we have done a lot of really, I think, important species level work around deer and grouse and wolves, but our capacity is not limited to that. And we want our work to also reflect really the loss of biodiversity that's being experienced around the planet, and helping people in Wisconsin understand what our role can be in helping stem that loss and restore both the habitat and the species viability that we need to protect the ecosystems that we all depend on. And finally, we think it's critical as a admittedly older organization that we continue to advance the opportunities and the engagement of both young people and people from different and diverse backgrounds within green fire. We're only stronger as a result of bringing people into our midst that can see the world differently and have a different stake in our future. And as Dolly described, and you heard from Jenny and from from Ellen, the benefits for all of us of that engagement are already beginning to show, and we're really early in that effort. Next slide, please. We understand that our biggest asset is our ability to focus on science and science-based analysis with the deep expertise that comes from our members. And that's what people view us as. That's the reason we get phone calls from members of the media and from policymakers. That's our truly unique asset as an organization, and we want to continue to focus on that and really cultivate that asset and our credibility in that space. Next slide, please. But in many ways, we also know that we need to broaden our focus, that it's not just the hard science. We also, in the work that we do, assessing policies and programs, we need to bring in people who are affected by those programs. We need to bring in stakeholders. We need to bring in different perspectives to help make sure that where we're headed really reflects Wisconsin's future and the interests of everyone who's affected by those issues. And so this is a stock photo from the internet. We want to look more like this in the years ahead. And our teams, we want to look more like this in the years ahead. And that's an area where our focus on diversity, our focus on addressing environmental justice and issues of equity inclusion are going to be critical pillars of the work that we're doing in the next few years. Next slide, please. And finally, we've gotten this feedback consistently, and we know that this is a critical point for us. We need to design our programs with success in mind. And that means at the very beginning stages of envisioning and launching projects or programs for Green Fire, we need to be thinking about the end results we're looking for, about the impacts we're trying to achieve, and we need to be working backwards strategically, thinking about our role in that issue, thinking about the work of our partners, how our work fits into that larger universe of actors. And we need to be designing measurements and adequate resources into all of our work so that we can be more effective and more strategic. And so we're going to be, I think, more discerning in evaluating and taking on projects in the years ahead. But also we want to take on projects in a way that we can truly measure what we want success to be. So it's going to be an exciting year ahead for Green Fire. We want to take this work. We're already beginning to build it into our annual planning for next year. We're beginning to build it into our budgeting for next year. And we're going to have a lot of rich conversations about how Green Fire sort of reaches that next level of impact based on the work we've already done and what we're capable of. I think I've got one more slide here. So we would just want to thank all of you who contribute to that work. As we mentioned earlier, your support, both through your time and talent and through your contributions, makes a huge difference for us. If you haven't received our annual appeal, send me an email. I'll make sure that you get one. But you can go to our website at wigreenfire.org, make a gift, and you could make a gift today. And we appreciate every gift that everyone's able to make. So with that, I think we're wrapping up almost on time. Tom, please send us home.
If I could add a few more things, I would appreciate it, Fred. First of all, I remind you what our treasurer said. In addition to making your gift, invite a friend to join Green Fire. Our voices will be stronger with more people that are involved, both fiscally and financially, and also on our work groups. And so we'd appreciate if you'd spread the good word. And then a word about all of our strategic planning. We're not going to make any progress on any of those issues unless we work with both political parties, period. The Contaminants of Emerging Concern has a meeting tomorrow where we're going to talk about some unique and different ways to work with business and industry to accomplish what we need to do in that group. And so I just want to reiterate what you said earlier, Fred, that we've got to work with all political stripes if we're going to accomplish what we want to do.
Thanks, Tom. Well, it's been a great evening. and you're free to go, but you don't have to go. So we're gonna hold